what interesting session it was with just really moderating, and I'm very excited that Mitesh had just touched upon some of the key technology intervention required to address the data at rest use cases, which is the current need for the organizations, both for starting their cloud journey as well as for handling the challenges on the on-premise infrastructure that's coming up with digital journey. So myself, I am Ved Prakash. I take care of the business development for Thales Data Protection Solutions for India. And I would be here taking next 10 to 15 minutes of your time to build the excitement in terms of what is that you need to know to ensure that your data is protected with respective journey forward that you are taking either for in the cloud or in terms of innovation for by building any on-premise infrastructure that is going forward. So the agenda that I have set for the conversation today is just a very quick brief about Thales as an organization. Most of you might be aware, but people who are new, this will help. Then we will talk about immediately the problems with the cloud data security. And this would be very relevant to most of the organizations and the participants out here who are considering or embarking on a cloud journey. How do we handle these key problem areas? And that is where I think you would be really interested to know how as a Thales contributes in solving those problem areas when you are looking to move your workload in cloud. Then very important aspect we will touch upon in terms of the regulatory guidelines and compliance mandates, even though whatever is existing in India today, primarily driven by RBI and IDRBT, and definitely there are new guidelines which are worked upon, which would be coming up. How do we ensure that we take care of the key asks within these kind of guidelines? Then we will just see what are the kind of stages for data security in cloud as you progress. And then very important is about Thales solution. And this is something which would help you to meet all your journey for solving the problems that you face in the digital transformation initiatives currently. Very quick about how the reference deployment architecture basis of some of the new use cases we have implemented across large organizations. And this will just help you also with an idea that this is how this kind of solution works across. And then I would like to have a key takeaway for all of you in terms of the closing remarks that Thales recommends, and most of you would already also have ensuring certain components of this initiative to ensure that best practices in security are met in terms of data protection. And if time permits, we will take any questions. Thank you. So we're good to go about Thales. So I understand Thales is a French organization. We work in a very strategic areas spanning across defense, government, and banking. And the data protection unit within Thales is called Cloud Protection. And here we are almost protecting 80% of the world's payment transaction data. So as a footprint, we are spread across 68 countries. We have the 80,000 employees, and we have clocked 19 billion euro revenue for last year. A very key point I want to highlight is that we spent significantly around 1 billion euro in terms of bringing innovation in the solutions with respect to the emerging or evolving threat landscape that we are facing. And the quick info about the solution lines or the products that we bring in. Crypto processors are one line where we are world leader called HSMs. And then we have the data protection platform, which consists of encryption and key management techniques or solutions. We are number one here as well as high-speed encryptors, which help you to secure the connectivity between your multiple data centers. And this is also a solution where we have been the leaders in the global market. So let me just bring you this piece of information in terms of the data record that has been exposed in last 3 years over the cloud. You would be astonished that almost over 2 billion sensitive records have been exposed through breach in cloud security. And that means to say that businesses are not applying adequate security measure to protect sensitive data in the cloud. And we would see this in the next subsequent slides. What I want to highlight out here is that, see, when the organizations are evolving and taking a multi-cloud strategy, it becomes very important to have a uniform way of protecting the data across the cloud provider, as well as also on the front that remains on-premise. So a lot of companies that are going for a hybrid setup are looking out for a right technology platform that addresses both of these scenarios. And this is where Thales would fit in to meet these kind of requirements. So that brings me to the next slide, which is based on the number one problem that you see when you are moving your workload in cloud. And the number one problem that starts is in terms of how do you maintain the security controls on your cloud service provider? And how would you manage the PII data that is moving in there? How do you demonstrate the compliance to the audits that ensure that you remain, that data remains in your control, or you are responsible for the data security? So a very critical questions that comes to often the decision makers or the key stakeholders is in terms of even if there is an encryption process happening in cloud, how are these encryption keys getting created? Where these encryption keys being stored, and who is accessing these keys? What is the visibility? So these are some of the burning concerns currently, which all the stakeholders are looking out to address the solution to address this kind of concerns. And a very important point is that you need to decouple the encryption keys from data sets. This has been a best practice mandate since few, and you will see also in subsequent slides that regulators have also called out that the encryption keys should always be segregated and separately managed from the application owners in a certified or a trusted key management solution, which should have certain accreditations like FIPS 140-2 and above. So that brings me to bring up a shared responsibility model that today all the cloud service provider demonstrates on their website as well, and ensures that it is just not the responsibility for the cloud service provider, but there is an equivalent responsibility on the customer. With respect to particular approach or model you take, whether it is infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or software as a service, you see the data is the customer's responsibility. And let me make this very clear that if you are living with the presumption that we have gone with the cloud service provider and the responsibility lies with him, then this understanding needs to be revisited, because at the end, in the case of any breach, you will be held accountable definitely for being responsible for not putting at the adequate controls around the data when you have whichever approach or model you took with the cloud service provider. So what are the top cloud security risk area that actually would be really relevant to think about or consider? The number one is the encryption key visibility. Now, this cloud service providers portals provide you a very limited visibility to the encryption keys, and primarily the access by their privileged users or their admins. So this is one challenge that you need to really figure out how do you get that concern addressed. The other concern is related to data loss. And here you see there is an insufficient authorization control or the DR services to ensure that keys are not accidentally or intentionally deleted. Also, if you see when a request to delete a cloud resource is made, this may not result in true wiping of data, either because extra copies of data are stored but are not available, or because the disk to be destroyed also stores data from other clients. So again, these are very relevant risks in today's scenario. Very important point is vendor lock-in. Customers today do not want to be locked with a single cloud service provider. And that becomes a key issue, and that's where multi-cloud strategy is being discussed to avoid this pain area. Compliance, both from internal perspective as well as external perspective, becomes a key requirement for organization when they are moving this highly sensitive data in cloud. And that is also one of the issues which remains to be addressed. And last but very important is about the key lifecycle management. What I mean here is that the native cloud service provider key management services has a limited ability to automate the life cycle of the keys, especially across multiple subscription. And we will see how this is in more detail in subsequent slide. So these are the limitations that comes with the cloud adoption being considered as the next initiative within the organization. Another slide that becomes very important, which is about that the use of encryption has grown over a period of time. If you see, companies historically have rolled out too many single-purpose encryption tools. The products, which are disjoint technologies actually, and they can only secure a specific type of data, systems, or environments. So today there is a compelling need to overcome this piecemeal approach and have a one uniform solution across these use cases which can be met, because managing these silo encryption solutions brings an added complexity, inefficiency, and becomes expensive in due course of time. So organizations need to look at a larger or a futuristic perspective of managing these all use cases from a uniform and technology agnostic solution. My next slide talks about the regulatory guidelines that are enforcing the organizations. Now, this is primarily from the banks, who are the most sensitive, and the regulators have always there as to give the first inputs to ensure that stringent practices are in place. You see, IDRBT has very clearly called out that banks should retain the control and ownership of their data when they are moving it the workload in cloud. Next slide is on Cloud Security Alliance. As we all know, it's a trusted, unbiased third party entirely dedicated to cloud security. And their cloud guidance, like cloud control metrics, are considered as standards in preparing to migrate the workloads on cloud, be it infrastructure as a service, software as a service, or PaaS. And here also they very clearly say that there is a need for having a trusted key management solution in place rather than relying with the cloud service provider. RBI also clearly has called out in their earlier guidance that there is a need to have a strong and robust encryption key management solution in place, which can act as a single source for creating these encryption keys, which works across the organization and gives you the control and visibility in terms of the access, who is accessing the encryption keys. And this helps to have a centralized console for managing the encryption processes centrally in your organization. So now we've seen then regulatory guidelines also mandating, and you have understood that you are responsible for the data security. So what would you do? What do you do now? So this slide talks about the different stages of data security, which we have found in discussion with the customers. And the very first one is where you are sticking up with an approach of doing this encryption in software, and you are putting the encryption keys in the software or within the application. This is a very, very non-effective measure to really do or safeguard the sensitive data using the native encryption. And that is where the organizations felt the need to move up in the process of its better security, and then they got you also start using the cloud key management solution. Now here, if you see, the cloud service provider natively supports the key management, but then as I mentioned, the issue is that you don't own the keys to the data, and the owner of the keys is the cloud provider. So that means that he can look into your encrypted data, which is not good, and no organization would want it. So that brings you to the next level of security control that you need to look at, and is the most effective way to look at control. This is called bring your own key. And bring your own key is where you get the ownership and control of the encryption keys, and you would be responsible for the key rotation, as well as you will be knowing who is accessing your keys. And the most advanced level would be where you go for bringing your own encryption process in the cloud, which is called bring your own encryption, where you say that, look, we don't need your system, we want our system to work, which completely brings the total control of data protection or the encryption process happening on the workload in the cloud. So typically, we see the options for data encryptions in the cloud is that for most sensitive confidential data, they need to stick to bring your own encryption. The sensitive data, like the others, we have applications like SaaS, like Office 365 or Salesforce, where you don't have that flexibility to use bring your own encryption. Then you go with bring your own key approach, and that meets the purpose of, again, helping you to own the control of encryption keys with the customer. And in case there is not sensitive data and it's not classified data, you can accept the risk with going with the native cloud encryption, and you can give away the control to them. So my next slide talk about the benefits where we see in automated key lifecycle management versus the manual approach that cloud service providers key management process works. If you see on my right hand side, the admin from the cloud service provider would be involved in creating, doing the backup, deploying, all these respective life cycle of the key process. It is which will be highly dependent on the person and is highly manual and prone to error. Whereas the technology solution that we bring in, which automates the complete journey of the encryption keys, right from creating to backup to deletion, without any human intervention, and hence it makes easy to use and free from any chances of human error or insider abuse or any risk which is associated with the manual approach. So the way forward to look at the data protection approach for your workload in cloud would be bring your own encryption and bring your own key. Of course, these bring your own keys and bring your own encryption works on specific scenarios. If it is purely from the software as a service, where you have third-party softwares being hosted on the cloud, then bring your own key would be the right control that will help you to meet the challenges with respect to the data risk that are involved, and bring your own encryption wherever the customer is moving for the approach of infrastructure as a service. The way you are controlling on-premise infrastructure with doing the file level encryption or the database encryption, you can extend the same control on the cloud and have your own encryption process and the control mechanism around it. So that's something which I wanted to touch upon quickly in the interest of time. And this is where the solution that Thales brings in, which we call it all-in-one platform, which helps you to discover, protect, and control. So it helps you to meet the journey across the life cycle of data, right from the process where you find where the sensitive data is, whether it is in which data is stored on premise, on cloud. You do the scan and you get the risk scores around those sensitive data, basis which you take a decision what is the control that we will need to implement, whether it is encryption, it is tokenization, and then the key management, which is the heart of the solution, which does your complete lifecycle encryption key management for on-premise as well as for the data moving on cloud. So all this is from the single console, and it's the same platform which can meet your multiple use cases going forward. So this is the reference architecture that we have implemented in some of the leading organizations, where if you see this on-premise data center where the key manager, or which act as the trusted source to create your keys, and then this is imported in cloud. Whether it is bring your own key or bring your own encryption, the key source remains with bank or with the organization on premise, and you take this process for meeting or bringing the controls around the data sensitive data being held in any of these scenarios. So I will come to key takeaway and the measures that we recommend organizations, and most of the bigger organizations are already taking some or other approaches mentioned out here. Then the first is definitely to encrypt the PII data. And then second is to have a data-centric approach and start by seeing or bringing the technology which acts as a last line of defense by bringing the control directly over the data, which is encryption. And we have seen that specifically a file-level encryption approach addresses 90% of our customers' need alone for encryption for data at rest. And very important point is that while you are doing encryption, you need to segregate the encryption keys in separate environment and have robust key management system in place. For any workload moving in cloud, we've seen that it's the bring your own key or bring your own encryption, which would be the key right approach to ensure that you take the ownership of the encryption keys in the cloud. And in the end, data encryption becomes one of the very critical initiatives in terms of protection against the rising data breaches, the ransomware attacks, where the data becomes useless to attackers if it's encrypted. And it also helps you to meet or mitigate the risk from the insider threats or the root users that also at times happen. So this is all I had for my session today, and you can reach out to me on the number or the email ID to help you out with a more detailed discussion around each of these specific stages that I tried to quickly cover in my discussion today. So Jeevan, over to